The first time Greg Holloway screamed at me in front of the team, he was holding a paper plate with cake on it. Red velvet, cream cheese frosting. It was the CEO's birthday, and someone had the brilliant idea to make it a town hall celebration like the words cake and capital expenditures belonged in the same sentence. He slapped the report on the table, eyes twitching, voice full volume. Don't submit that, are you blind? I hadn't even sat down yet. I was still holding the stupid sparkly card we all signed, pretending we liked the guy whose greatest leadership contribution was a framed photo of his golden retriever in the executive bathroom. Everyone turned. A few eyebrows popped. A fork paused midair. Then came that sound, half chuckle, half scoff, as if I'd handed in a spreadsheet written in crayon. I'll fix it, I muttered, though my blood was already ice. I'd reviewed that report 6 times. Was perfect when I left my desk. What the hell was going on? I didn't fix it. But before we get to that, I want to ask you something real quick. If you're listening to this and you haven't hit that little subscribe button yet, go ahead. Most folks just scroll through without subscribing, and that's totally fine, but hitting that button and liking this story actually helps the team keep these coming. No spreadsheets, no footnotes, just good old-fashioned office chaos. Served warm, now back to the cake-flavored betrayal. I sat back down at my desk, cheeks still burning from the public gut punch, and stared at the screen. Greg's tone hadn't been frustration, it was something more smug. The kind of smug that comes from knowing something you don't. He wasn't correcting a mistake, he was performing. I pulled up the report again. The formatting looked fine. The totals checked out. But then I noticed something small, stupid small, kind of thing only someone who stared at balance sheets under fluorescent lights for 6 years would catch. Footnote 7, line 3, adjusted forecast reflects updated rounding on asset liability ratio. Rounding? That figure hadn't needed rounding, and I sure as hell didn't write that sentence. My last saved version didn't include any adjusted forecast. I pulled up the version history from the shared drive. Greg had downloaded it yesterday. No comments, no edits tracked, just re-uploaded with a new timestamp. I clicked into the data source. That's when the dread kicked in. He'd changed a single digit, just one, from a 6 to an 8. It altered the entire quarterly asset-liability ratio by enough to make a healthy acquisition look like a steal, which, of course, it wasn't. Not unless someone wanted it to seem like Stratamore Systems was doing a little better than we actually were, right before a merger. I'm not a CPA or a lawyer. I'm a senior analyst who clawed my way up from executive assistant. My job is to get the numbers right and keep my mouth shut. But this smelled like insurance fraud got drunk at a birthday party and decided to crash a shareholder meeting. I didn't say a word, not to Greg, not to Marcy in legal who I usually text for just between us girls sanity checks. I copied my untouched version of the report, one from last night before Greg worked his magic, and saved it to a secure folder. Then I took a screenshot of the metadata on his version. The timestamps didn't match. His file had been edited offline, deliberately. I stared at his smirking face across the office. He was making rounds now, tossing cake into people's hands like a benevolent dictator of frosting. Someone even laughed when he did finger guns. Finger guns. I watched him high-five the guy from marketing who thinks TikToks count as campaign strategy, and I knew something in my gut. This wasn't just Greg being a jerk. This was Greg gambling with numbers big enough to bury people. The thing is, I'd seen this pattern before. Not at Stratamore, but at the firm I worked for during grad school. VP fudges the margin, hides it in a note, closes the deal, and boom, golden parachute. The analyst who caught it. Let's just say she got a restructure package and a LinkedIn post with 13 likes. But I wasn't 23 anymore, and Greg wasn't the smartest man in the room. I opened a new email, typed in the name Baird Collins Chief Compliance Officer, attached my clean version, no commentary, no accusation, just a short subject line, Q3 summary report original, and a message that said, please advise. Then I hit send. I didn't know it yet, but that email would become the quiet little nudge that flipped the whole damn boardroom upside down. And Greg? He wouldn't be doing finger guns for much longer. The second time Greg said it, don't submit that, are you blind? He did it louder, and with that look people reserve for toddlers who have spilled juice on an iPad. I was already halfway to the boardroom. He said it with a fake laugh, like he was trying to make it sound like a joke. But the kind of joke where you're also the punchline, and the setup is your professional reputation dying in real time. Formatting's off, he added, tapping his temple with his pen. Line spacing, column alignment, numbers look bloated. I told you to double-check this stuff, Olivia. Except he hadn't. There had been no I told you, no Slack message, no comment in the shared doc. Just this staged little outburst in front of the team like I'd printed the report in Comic Sans and signed it in glitter glue. I felt everyone freeze around me. Rachel from Strategy doing that thing where she looks down and pretends to type nothing, Kevin making himself invisible behind his coffee mug. It was a perfect performance, controlled humiliation. Nobody defended me. Nobody ever does in these moments. They just wait for it to pass. Like a bad smell in an elevator. I didn't speak. I just took the report back from his hand like some obedient intern and walked to my desk like my bones were made of jello. But inside, my blood was tapping out Morse code on my ribs because here's the thing, I had checked the formatting, triple checked. Numbers don't just misbehave overnight like toddlers or chihuahuas. The spacing looked fine. The headers hadn't moved. The fonts were all company standard. Helvetica New, size 11, and bloated numbers? What does that even mean? It wasn't like I fat-fingered a comma and added 2 extra zeros to the liabilities. But I went back to the file anyway, opened both versions, the one I finalized last night and the one Greg had just printed. And there it was. Footnote 7, line 3. A tiny line that hadn't existed yesterday. Adjusted forecast reflects updated rounding on asset liability ratio. It looked harmless. Harmless like a butter knife buried in your back. Because that rounding adjustment changed the entire financial trajectory of the acquisition we'd spent 6 months prepping. Instead of showing a 2.5% variance, it fudged it to 1.1%. Just enough to make the numbers look tight, smooth, merger-ready. Except they weren't. They were soft and risky. The kind of risk that gets buried under language like rounding and forecast buffer until someone signs the wrong dotted line and the company bleeds cash for 2 fiscal years. He'd done it on purpose. There was no doubt in my mind. This wasn't formatting. It was laundering, only instead of money, it was liability. I pulled up the file metadata. Greg had downloaded the original at 7:16 p.m. the night before. No comments, no change tracking. But his version had a new timestamp. 7:41 p.m., uploaded from his local drive, not the company cloud. I clicked Properties. Edited by G. Holloway, source, local disk D. Now, I don't know about you, but when your VP bypasses the company cloud to edit a financial report in the dark and uploads it 25 minutes later without documentation, that's not a formatting fix. That's a setup, and I was the fall girl. If that report had gone through with his number and been flagged post-merger, guess who'd have taken the hit? Not the guy with the corner office and a golf date with the CFO. It'd be me, the analyst who submitted the wrong numbers. The same analyst he dressed down in front of the team 10 minutes before kickoff. It was too clean, too convenient, too planned, so I sat there, humiliated but still, quiet, like a coiled wire. I didn't send the altered version to the board. I didn't raise a red flag on Slack. I didn't throw Greg under the bus. Not yet. Instead, I opened my personal Gmail on my phone under the desk and emailed myself both versions, the clean one and his. I renamed them, Q3 Final and Q3 Greg. I attached the metadata screenshots, including his machine ID and edit timestamps. I moved them to a flash drive I kept taped under my keyboard tray, an old habit from the days when people thought I was just the assistant and left confidential memos on my desk. Then I opened the company intranet, searched whistleblower clause, and took a screenshot of the contact protocol and protection policy, just in case. Greg passed by my desk again, fake smiling like nothing had happened. He patted the back of Steve's chair and tossed a wink at marketing. I kept my eyes on the screen, fingers still. He thought I was backing down. He thought I was rattled. And to be fair, part of me was. But the other part? The part that had eaten humble pie for 6 years and sat through his Monday morning power meetings where he quoted movies and took credit for my data, that part was loading the chamber. And Greg had just handed me the bullet. The office always gets weirdly quiet around 3 o'clock p.m., that post-lunch coma where fluorescent lights start humming louder than your thoughts, and the scent of stale birthday cake mingles with the smell of deadline anxiety. I was sitting in that silence, but my heart was doing drum solos in my ears. Not because of nerves, those were long gone. No, this was the moment right before the storm, when your body goes still because your brain knows it just found something radioactive. I reopened the files for the third time, lining them up side by side like mugshots. My original on the left, clean, timestamped from the shared drive, saved at 6:42 p.m. the night before. Greg's on the right, uploaded at 7:41 p.m., allegedly to adjust formatting, yet somehow filled with a subtle little landmine in footnote 7. Here's the thing about corporate lies. They rarely come in the form of dramatic forgeries or criminal masterplans. It's always the smallest moves that cost millions. A decimal moved. A line item corrected. A phrase massaged just enough to skate past legal but impress the board. And in this case, Greg had taken the liberty of rounding an asset valuation tied to the Huron acquisition, the crown jewel of the merger. One change, $6.3 million turned into $8.1 million, just enough of a bump to shift the company's overall projected margin into safe harbor territory. The kind of clean, upward figure that makes a buyer smile and an investor stop asking questions. On paper, it wasn't fraud. Not exactly, just updated assumptions. The kind of gray area people like Greg live in, right up until someone shines a flashlight on it. I dove deeper. His version was a copy, but it wasn't copied from the cloud. The system log showed his download came directly from the team folder at 7:16 p.m., but when I checked the Properties tab on his file, I found a weird little discrepancy. The last modified time was earlier, 7:11 p.m., which made no sense. You can't edit a file before you've downloaded it unless you had a local copy saved already, which meant Greg had worked off a separate version altogether and just used the shared one as a cover. Even more telling, his machine ID showed up as StratVPGH01, his company laptop, and the file was saved under a local path, D/Q3 acquisitions merger final docx. Not even Excel, he'd exported it into a Word report, wrapped the data in boardroom-friendly language, and re-uploaded it as if it were my final version. He'd overwritten mine in the project folder with his final, marked it as ready to submit, and called it a day. If I hadn't printed a hard copy the night before, if he'd yelled at me just a little later, maybe after the town hall, I never would have looked twice. Hell, I might have submitted it. And that's when the knot in my stomach stopped being dread and started being something else. Strategy. I pulled up my sent emails. The one to Baird, the chief compliance officer, was still sitting in my sent folder. Clean version attached. No message beyond please advise. I hadn't used the word altered. I hadn't said tampered. I wasn't accusing anyone, not yet. I just sent him the original and let the data speak for itself. Then I clicked into Greg's Slack profile and pulled up his recent activity. Nothing in writing. No instructions about changing the report. No notes, no messages. But I noticed something peculiar. The night before, he'd accidentally uploaded the wrong file to our team channel, then immediately deleted it. Too fast for anyone to open. I didn't need to guess what that file was. He tested the upload, probably to make sure the file name didn't raise eyebrows, then yanked it back. Classic Greg, dumb enough to leave fingerprints, smug enough to think nobody would care. I stared at the screen, wondering how many other times he'd pulled this off. If it was just me he tried to use, or if I was just the easiest to scapegoat. Low enough on the ladder to throw under the bus, high enough to have access to sensitive numbers. The perfect stooge, except I wasn't playing stooge anymore. I printed both reports, mine and his, stapled them, labeled them. I took out my notebook and wrote a one-line summary of the metadata discrepancies. I logged into our document management system and exported the audit trail for the shared folder. It showed every upload, every edit, every machine that touched the file. Then I made one more move. I went back into the shared folder, duplicated Greg's version, and renamed it Greg version 2 final. Just like that, casual. Something he wouldn't notice unless he was really looking. And in the footer, I added one tiny line, reviewed by G. Holloway, 9/22 final draft for submission. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't sabotage. It was bait, because Greg wasn't going to stop at yelling. Men like him never do. They double down, especially when they think you're scared. Especially when they think they've got you cornered with corporate etiquette and plausible deniability. I wasn't scared, I was documenting. And Greg? He had no idea I'd already opened the door to the one man in this company who actually read footnotes like his life depended on it. At 4:12 p.m., the office smelled like cake, toner, and lies. That's the exact minute I clicked send on the email to Baird Collins, our chief compliance officer. Subject line, Q3 summary report original. Body text attached. Please advise. No emojis. No passive-aggressive winks. Just the facts in a clean PDF with its metadata intact, time-stamped, and squeaky pure. I hovered over the screen for a second after it was gone, watching the spinning circle of fate vanish. My palms were slick. Not from panic. Panic had already done its dance and exited stage left. What I felt now was something colder. Focused. Surgical, like the click of a scalpel against stainless steel. If Greg was playing chess, he just left his king 2 moves from check, and I'd barely lifted my pawn. After that, I got up, walked to the break room, poured myself a cup of burnt decaf, and smiled at Kevin like I hadn't just launched a potential internal investigation before the town hall. He nodded back like nothing was wrong. Maybe because he didn't know, or maybe because in corporate America, pretending everything's fine is just part of the job description. Back at my desk, I opened a new email window. This one went to my personal Gmail. I attached Greg's doctored file, his little masterpiece of inflated optimism, and renamed it GH version Q3 alt. I also dropped in screenshots of the file properties, version history, and the local drive path. In the body, I typed, secondary reference, do not delete. That one wasn't for anyone but me. Not for HR, not for legal, just insurance. Because when you catch a VP trying to sandbag a deal with creative accounting, you don't shout. You build a net quietly, one email at a time. Then I sat still. Didn't message anyone. Didn't make a face. Didn't even open a browser window that looked suspicious. I just got back to work, adjusting a sales forecast slide no one would look at, and pretending to laugh when Greg made a crack about how marketing's numbers are more fiction than finance. At 4:37 p.m., Baird replied. His email was 4 words long. Thank you. Sit tight. No signature. No context. No emoji. That's when the anticipation set in. My skin prickled like it knew the air had changed. The kind of quiet that usually comes before a boardroom door clicks shut and someone gets walked out with their badge in a sandwich bag. I minimized the email, turned off my desktop notifications, and kept working like nothing was happening. But inside, every part of me was listening, watching, waiting. Then I pulled up the internet and searched employee whistleblower clause just to be sure. I'd seen it years ago during onboarding, buried in some HR training module I clicked through between meetings. At the time, I remembered thinking it was the kind of thing you only needed if someone was embezzling, or if the COO got caught in the server room with someone's intern. But today, it was suddenly relevant. There it was, Section 8.2.3, Whistleblower Protections, Retaliation Policy, and Anonymous Reporting Procedures. I downloaded the full PDF, highlighted the section about internal financial concerns and executive conduct, took a screenshot, saved it to the flash drive under a new folder, just in case. I wasn't scared of Greg, but I wasn't stupid either. Men like him don't go down easy. They smirk through depositions and settle with NDAs. They rebrand, get rehired, show up at another company under a new title, Chief Growth Architect. But if this house was going to burn, I wanted to make damn sure I wasn't holding the match when the alarms went off. I glanced over at him across the office. He was laughing about something with Kyle from procurement, elbow resting on the cubicle wall like he was posing for a used car calendar. The man had no idea what he'd just stepped in. And me? I wasn't Olivia the analyst anymore. I was Olivia the recorder, the observer, the woman who knew the exact temperature at which a company starts to boil from the inside out. And I had just turned up the heat. The office smelled like sugar and desperation. Someone had gone overboard decorating the break area, balloons taped to ceiling tiles, a happy birthday, Roger. Banners sagging over the coffee machine, like even it was tired of pretending. Greg was in his element, strutting around in a gold party hat like he'd personally invented both cake and capitalism. He made a big show of giving the CEO a novelty mug that said world's oldest startup founder, and everyone fake laughed like it was the funniest thing since budgets were invented. I watched from my desk, keeping my smile calibrated at agreeable but forgettable. You learn that expression early in corporate life. Just enough warmth to seem like you're a team player, not so much that someone assumes you're not watching everything. Greg sauntered past my desk with his paper plate, 2 layers of cake, barely balanced, fork stabbed in like a flag of conquest. Ready for round 2? He said, motioning toward the meeting room. Don't mess up the math this time, eh? I grinned, wouldn't dream of it. Then I got the email. Subject, boardroom check-in 4:55 p.m. from Baird Collins Body, quick alignment. Bring your laptop, no CC, no tone, just straight from the iceberg. I packed up slow, pretending to still be checking emails and walked calmly to the boardroom. The glass walls made it easy to spot who was already inside. Not who I expected. No Greg, no finance team, just Baird and a folder, thick, manila, sitting neatly in front of him like a loaded weapon in a Western saloon. He didn't stand when I entered. Just motioned to the chair, but before I could sit, he said, "Actually, Olivia, would you mind waiting just outside for a moment?" I froze mid-step. "Sure," I said, pulse instantly pounding. Then he slid the folder slightly toward the center of the table, and I saw it. The report, the one I sent, clean and unedited, paperclip to Greg's version, like a before and after exhibit in a courtroom drama. Something about the way Baird looked at it, like it was already guilty, gave me a rare, flickering satisfaction. Not victory, not yet, but that quiet buzz of knowing the math was on my side. I stepped out and stood just beyond the glass, pretending to check Slack on my phone. The room was soundproof, but I could see Baird dialing a number. The board liaisons, maybe. Legals. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't in the hot seat. Not anymore. A wave of chatter echoed down the hall from the party zone. Greg's voice, loud and obnoxious, bounced off the drywall. "She probably thinks EBITDA is a new yoga move." Laughter, not real, of course. The kind that lives at the bottom of expense reports and resumes. I leaned against the wall, calm, waiting. The boardroom door stayed closed. Inside, the fuse was lit, and Greg, he was still out there making balloon animals out of ethics. Greg was in rare form, holding court like a drunk prom king at his 20th reunion. He had one of those fake stage voices on, the kind he saved for moments when he wanted to seem charming but really just sounded like a game show host on Quaaludes. "Let's raise a toast," he bellowed, raising a solo cup of Diet Coke. "To the man of the hour, Roger, the legend, the CEO. Myth with the gold watch and the patience of a saint, especially when it comes to budget meetings." The crowd chuckled politely. A few board members were scattered along the back wall, pretending to enjoy themselves. The general counsel stood near the front, doing that slow nod that corporate lawyers do when they're half listening and half evaluating how much risk is in the room. Roger, our CEO, grinned sheepishly and waved it off. All right, no need to embarrass me," he said. "Let's just enjoy the cake." Greg beamed like he'd just landed a Netflix special. "But before we dig in, I just want to say," and that's when the boardroom door opened. The sound was small, not dramatic. Just a click, a gentle push, and in walked Baird Collins with the expression of a man who had read every page of your diary and didn't like the ending. He didn't say a word to me, didn't even glance in my direction. He walked straight past the cake table, past the balloons and the cheap paper plates, straight up to Greg, who was still mid-toast. Greg's smile faltered. "Baird," he said, trying to keep it light, "you're just in time for the sugar rush." Baird didn't respond. He reached into the folder under his arm, pulled out a stapled printout, and handed it to Greg like a warrant. Would you mind, Baird said, his voice measured, reading footnote 7, line 3 aloud for the group? The room froze, every head swiveled. Forks paused midair. Rachel from strategy blinked 3 times in a row like she was buffering. Greg blinked at the paper. Sure, yeah, he chuckled nervously. Not sure why we're doing dramatic readings, but okay, he squinted at the footnote. I watched the blood drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug in his ankle. He cleared his throat. Adjusted, forecast reflects updated, rounding on his voice trailed off. Silence. Baird didn't move. His eyes were locked on Greg's, unblinking. Greg swallowed, tried again. Adjusted forecast reflects updated rounding on asset liability ratio, he muttered. Then he laughed, a little too loud. Come on, Baird, this is old data, just some formatting mix-up, you know how these things go. Nobody laughed, not Roger, not legal, not the board members, not even Kyle from procurement, who laughed at everything, including his own HR warnings. The room had gone stiff. Cold? I saw Roger shift slightly in his seat, leaning forward just enough to suggest he was now fully tuned in. The lawyer next to him picked up a pen without writing anything. Classic lawyer move. Greg's fingers gripped the printout tighter. Look, it's a harmless edit. There was a decimal issue, so I rounded up $1.8 million, Baird asked, still calm. Greg's mouth opened, closed, tried again. It didn't materially affect, that's not your call, Baird said, cutting him off with the tone of a guillotine blade. You made undocumented edits to a critical acquisition report. You uploaded it under someone else's timestamp. You submitted it as final. He let that hang in the air. Greg turned to Roger. Roger, come on, this is being blown out of enough, the CEO said quietly. Just one word. And suddenly, the party was over. The silence that followed was sharp enough to file your nails on. No one moved. Even the air seemed to back away from Greg like it didn't want to be associated. Greg looked around, searching for a lifeline. Someone to jump in, defend him, laugh it off, anything. But no one was smiling, not anymore. Greg's voice cracked in that special way only cornered men manage, equal parts indignation and panic held together by thin professional varnish. It was an old draft, he said, holding the report out like it might explode. I must have uploaded the wrong file. It happens. Late nights, multiple versions, anyone could make that mistake. His face was flushed now, a blotchy pink creeping up from his collar. His shirt, perfectly crisp 20 minutes ago, was starting to sag at the neckline. He looked like a birthday clown halfway through a thunderstorm. Baird didn't blink. He didn't argue. He didn't even glance up at Greg. He just opened the leather folder he'd brought in, took out one sheet, and began to read in that same calm, surgical tone he'd used from the start. File, Q3 Acquisitions Merger Final DocX created, September 22nd, 7:11 p.m., modified 7:41 p.m. Machine ID, StratVPGH01, location path, D/document/board ready reports. Baird looked up, not at Greg, but toward the general counsel. Local edit, not cloud synced, not version tracked, not an old draft. It was a standalone offline file, created and modified on Greg Holloway's device outside of the shared document protocol. Greg's lips parted like he was about to object, but no sound came out. The lawyer from legal stepped forward now, her voice quiet but loaded. We need to move this to a closed session. That was the phrase. The corporate equivalent of locking a door behind someone and dimming the lights. Greg turned to Roger, the CEO, man he'd been toasting 10 minutes earlier. Roger, this is getting way out of hand. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Roger didn't respond, didn't shake his head, didn't nod. He just leaned back in his chair, eyes unreadable, fingers tented in front of his lips. The room shifted. You could feel it like the pressure change before a tornado. Greg's authority, his momentum, his voice, even his physical presence was shrinking by the second. He tried again. You've seen me work these numbers for 6 quarters straight. I built the acquisition model. I've been the one we're aware, Baird cut in. Greg swallowed hard. His eyes flicked around the room, grasping for something, anything. Rachel, Kevin, Kyle from procurement, nobody met his gaze. Nobody offered even a blink of solidarity. He was on an island now, and the tide was rising fast. And me? I hadn't said a word. I stood near the back, behind the circle of execs, notebook in hand, looking just curious enough to seem like I was still catching up, like none of this had anything to do with me. That was the trick. Invisibility weaponized. I watched Greg's body language collapse in on itself, shoulders curling, breath quickening. The kind of physical unraveling that only happens when the performance dies, and there's no script left to lean on. He looked like he might actually cry. Lawyer motioned toward the side room adjacent to the main floor, the glass-walled fishbowl reserved for sensitive matters. Greg hesitated, then began to move, dragging his dignity behind him like a broken briefcase. As he passed me, he glanced in my direction. It wasn't suspicion, it was fear, like some part of him knew but not how or when or where the knife had entered. Just that it had. I held his gaze for a moment, not smug, not gloating, just steady. And then I looked away, as if I didn't have a single thing to do with the man being walked into that closed-door meeting like a defendant awaiting sentencing. Because I didn't need the credit. Not yet. When the boardroom door finally opened, the only sound was the soft shuffle of Greg's dress shoes dragging across the laminate floor. He came out first, no blazer, no birthday charm, no smirk. just a pale, silent man walking slightly behind an HR director with a clipboard and the expression of someone who'd had to do this far too many times. Greg didn't even glance at the rest of us. His eyes were fixed on some invisible point in the distance, like if he stared hard enough, he could time travel back to yesterday and delete the footnote. The room didn't exhale until the door clicked shut behind them. Nobody said a word, not the CFO, not legal, not even Roger. It was like we were all waiting to make sure it had actually happened, like he might come bursting back and yelling, "Just kidding," with another damn spreadsheet and a frosting-streaked mug. But he didn't, he was gone. I had barely made it back to my desk when the message popped up. From CEO Executive Assistant subject, Executive Team Sync 5:30 p.m. Private, body, Olivia CEO requests your presence in Conf RMA. Please bring your laptop. My heart thumped once heavy, not with fear exactly. Just wait. That final gravity of knowing the moment is about to shift, and whatever you do next, there's no stuffing the genie back into the PowerPoint. I grabbed my bag and walked across the hall to conference room A, the one they only used when the stuff was real. The pre-em and a deal room. The we're changing leadership room. The kind of place that didn't need a sign to make you sit up straighter. Inside, lights were dimmer and the energy sharper. Roger sat at the head of the table, flanked by Legal and Baird. Two other senior VPs were present, one from risk, one from strategy. No small talk, no snacks, just eyes on me as I entered. Olivia, Roger said, his voice even. Please have a seat. I did, spine straight, fingers folded over my knee. I didn't fidget, didn't try to smile. You've had a long day, he said, glancing down at the folder in front of him. Just wanted to thank you, quietly. He let the word linger. Your discretion during all this, it didn't go unnoticed, he continued. And your accuracy in documenting discrepancies was, he paused, searching for a word that felt like it had weight, exemplary. I gave a small nod, still holding my breath. Baird slid an envelope across the table. It was thick. Cream paper, unmarked except for my name in sharp black ink. This is formal acknowledgement of your cooperation, he said. You are not under any form of review. This remains confidential. Your name has not been raised in any discussions outside this room. That part hit harder than I expected. Not mentioned, not credited, not exposed, for now. Roger continued. Greg's departure will be handled at the highest level. The board has already been briefed. We'll initiate audit protocols to review all prior submissions he's touched in the past 2 quarters. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. If anything further is discovered, we may need your assistance. But as far as this incident is concerned, your role is complete. Complete. I nodded again, slower this time. I want to reiterate, he added, you did the right thing, the smart thing. Then a small, unexpected chuckle from the risk VP. Hell of a birthday, huh? Nobody laughed, not really. But I felt something loosen in my chest, just slightly, not a full breath, just the edge of one. They dismissed me after that. No marching band, no gold stars, just polite nods and a door held open. I walked out with the envelope clutched like a relic and passed by a group from HR who were whispering too loudly by the copier. I didn't stop, didn't slow. Back at my desk, nobody looked up. It was like nothing had happened. Greg's name hadn't been scrubbed from the org chart yet. His desk still had a coffee mug and a cactus on it, but the air felt different, charged, like static before the thunder. And I knew there was still one thing left, one final beat, because Greg hadn't just embarrassed me in private, he did it publicly. And now, that last page was about to turn. The email hit our inboxes around 4:45 p.m. Subject line, urgent department clarification, meeting at 5 p.m. attendance required. No details, no agenda, just a room number and the kind of tone that made you close every other tab without thinking. I got up slow, grabbed my notebook, not because I needed it, but because showing up empty-handed to something this quiet felt like walking into church without shoes. People filed in with that same unspoken tension, glancing at each other like we were all extras in a movie we hadn't been given the script for. The room was already set. Chairs in a circle, too close together, like we were supposed to pretend we were all part of the same happy little village. The CEO stood near the front, hands clasped, mouth tight. Baird stood beside him, holding a familiar manila folder. A woman from the board, Miss Reinhardt, a corporate executioner in pearl earrings, was present too. Expression unreadable. And then they brought Greg in. He looked smaller. No birthday hat, no jokes. His blazer was gone, sleeves rolled. His collar hung open like it had been yanked loose in a panic. He didn't look at anyone. Just kept his eyes low the way people do when they know every glance is a judgment. The door shut behind him with a soft click. No one spoke. Then Baird stepped forward and handed Greg a single piece of paper. It was the report, not a summary, not a redacted note, the full damn report. Baird didn't say a word, he just passed it over like it was a lit fuse. Miss Reinhardt cleared her throat. Greg, we'd like you to read line 3 of footnote 7. Greg looked up, blinking like he'd misheard. Now, she added. He hesitated. His fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the page. Adjusted forecast, he started, then stopped. His throat worked like he was trying to swallow a stone. The room held still. No phones, no whispers. Just the low hum of the HVAC and the sound of Greg Holloway realizing in real time that there would be no more spin, no more charm, no more second drafts. Baird's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a razor. Read it, as submitted. Greg's lips parted. Nothing came out. He tried again. Still nothing. A cough from the back. Someone shifted in their chair. And then, from the front of the room, Roger, our CEO, man of the hour whose face still hovered on a dozen balloons sagging from the ceiling, spoke. You submitted this, he said quietly, voice flat, on my birthday. No anger, no theatrics, just a wait. Greg's eyes darted around the room, looking for a savior, a lifeline, a door. When that failed, he did what he always did. He looked at me. I met his gaze. And I didn't say a word, no smirk, no nod, no triumph smeared across my face like cheap frosting. Just the same stillness I had when he first snapped at me in front of everyone. The same stillness I had when I spotted his fake rounding trick buried in the footnotes. The same stillness I carried when I forwarded the report instead of fixing it. It stretched on, 1 second, 2, until even the silence grew uncomfortable. Then Baird stepped forward and took the paper back without a word. The meeting ended without ceremony. No scolding, no announcement, just a corporate guillotine wrapped in passive tone and closed-door policy. HR took Greg aside again, this time for the final time. The rest of us filed out slowly, like leaving a funeral for someone nobody really liked. And there it was, off to the side on a folding table by the windows, the cake. Still whole. The words "Happy Birthday, Roger," scrawled across the top in blue icing, the edges sweating under the plastic dome. Nobody touched it. Not a single fork. Not a single slice. Just sugar and silence, cooling under the flicker of fluorescent lights. And me? I didn't say anything. Because sometimes the loudest revenge is the one you don't have to explain. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.